Before I tell you this story, I need you to do one thing. Think about whoever handed you something warm to drink this morning. Coffee. Tea. Whatever it was. Think about the hand that gave it to you and the face that went with it. Good. Now imagine that same hand. Same face. Same warmth. And a folder on their desk with your name on it labeled, Project Nemesis. That is where my story begins. I thought I understood how the world was put together. My name is Thatcher Vance, and for 7 years I gave everything I had to a high-stakes architectural firm in Chicago. My career, my social life, my weekends, my sleep. I was the senior lead architect at Thorne and Vane, a firm that didn't just build skyscrapers, we built icons. I lived inside blueprints and structural load calculations and the particular, intoxicating pressure of knowing that what you put on paper would one day be made of steel and glass and would alter the shape of a skyline for 100 years. I was very good at my job. I was very good at finding the fractures other people missed, the invisible faults in a complex system that, left unaddressed, would eventually bring the whole thing down. I was catastrophically bad at seeing the one that was right in front of me. Her name was Kestrel Thorne. She was the office manager on the 42nd floor. And every single morning, for 3 years, she set a hazelnut latte on my desk at exactly 8:05 a.m., not 8, not 8:15, 8:05, at exactly 180 degrees Fahrenheit, because I had mentioned my preference exactly once, in passing, during her second week on the job, and she had never forgotten. Every morning. That smile. That latte. That warmth that made the 42nd floor of a pressure cooker firm feel, somehow, like a place where you were known and safe. I didn't know I was looking into the eyes of a woman who had spent 3 years designing my destruction. I didn't know that every morning when she handed me that cup, she was also taking quiet inventory of how much further along the demolition was. By the time I understood what she was doing, the building was already coming down. Stay with me. Because this story is not simply about betrayal. It is about the specific, terrifying weaponization of warmth. And by the time it's over, you will never look at the person who makes your morning coffee the same way again. To understand how Kestrel destroyed me, you have to understand Chicago first. Chicago is not a city that whispers. It announces itself. It hits you in the chest the moment you step off the plane, that famous wind, raw and relentless, cutting between the steel and glass towers like it has a personal grievance with every living thing it touches. People who don't live there call it the Windy City and think they understand it. They don't. That wind is not just weather. It is character. Chicago is a city that strips you down to your essentials and asks, very bluntly, what are you actually made of? I arrived 11 years ago with 2 suitcases, a portfolio of student work I was embarrassingly proud of, and an iron conviction that I was going to build something that mattered. Not just buildings. Legacies. Structures that would stand long after I was gone, that would change the shape of a skyline, alter the way light fell on a street, give people a reason to stop walking and simply look up. I was hired at Thorne and Vane within 8 months. And I want you to understand what that meant. Thorne and Vane wasn't just a firm, it was a cathedral of the architecture world, responsible for some of the most recognizable structures on the American skyline. Walking through those glass lobby doors on my first day felt like walking onto hallowed ground. The 42nd floor smelled like fresh espresso and blueprint paper and the specific kind of ambition that hums in the air like an electrical current. I was 26 years old. And I was exactly where I wanted to be. The firm was run by a man named Silas Vane. If Chicago was a city that stripped you down, Silas was a man who had been stripped down long ago and had decided he preferred it that way. Silver-haired, hawk-eyed, with a handshake that felt like a structural assessment, like he was measuring your load-bearing capacity the moment your palm met his. He was brilliant, ruthless, and unapologetic about both. He didn't manage people so much as test them, continuously, to see what they were worth. Working under Silas was not comfortable. It was a forge. He had no patience for mediocrity, no softness for excuses, no mercy for anyone who confused effort with results. But here is the thing about forges, the things that survive them come out stronger than everything else. I survived. And then I thrived. Over 7 years, I climbed from junior associate to senior lead architect, the youngest person in the firm's history to hold that title. My personal life had become a quiet, barren landscape I had essentially agreed to sacrifice. No serious relationships. No weekend hobbies that didn't involve a drafting table. My social circle had shrunk to a handful of colleagues and occasional phone calls with my mother in Indianapolis, who worried constantly that I was becoming the building. She wasn't entirely wrong. But I had something I valued more than a social life. I had a reputation. Within Thorne and Vane, my name meant precision. It meant integrity. It meant that when Thatcher Vance put his name on a set of blueprints, those blueprints were right. Every person on the 42nd floor knew it. That reputation was the most valuable thing I owned. It was exactly what she came to take. Kestrel Thorne had joined the firm 3 years before everything happened, about 4 years into my tenure. I remember the day she arrived because she was not what I expected from an office manager. Most office managers at firms like ours are efficient, professional, pleasantly corporate, the human equivalent of good infrastructure. Reliable. Essential. Unremarkable. Kestrel was none of those things. Or rather, she was all of those things and something else entirely that I could never quite name. She was perhaps 32, with dark auburn hair pinned back in a way that managed to look both practical and deliberate. She moved through the office with a quiet, intentional grace, her heels clicking a rhythmic, almost musical pattern on the polished marble that I would come to associate so completely with her presence that, years later, the sound of heels on hard floor would make my stomach drop. She smiled constantly. Not the absent, automatic smile of someone performing politeness, but a real, warm, fully engaged smile that made you feel, when it was directed at you, like you were the most interesting person in the room. Like whatever you were about to say mattered to her deeply. In a building full of people constantly calculating, constantly performing for Silas Vane's approval, Kestrel's smile felt like a window opening. It felt like oxygen. She became, within weeks, the emotional center of the 42nd floor. She remembered everyone's birthdays, not just the date, but the preference. She knew the names of the mailroom clerk's children and asked about them every time she passed his desk. She knew the lead attorney had a mother in a nursing home in Evanston and that Tuesdays were hard for her. She was everyone's confidant. The institutional memory. The office sweetheart. The person you went to when you needed to file something confusing, resolve a conflict you didn't know how to navigate, or simply needed someone to tell you that everything was going to be okay. And every morning, at 8:05 exactly, that hazelnut latte was on my desk. For 3 years, that latte was the first good thing that happened to me every day. For 3 years, I looked into that smile and saw a friend. I didn't know I was looking into the eyes of a master demolitionist. I need you to understand that. Because I was not a naive man. I was not a fool. I was a highly educated, deeply analytical person who had spent a decade learning to find invisible fractures in complex systems. And I never saw it coming. Because she was that good. I want to pause here for just a moment. Before we go any further into how Kestrel dismantled my world piece by piece, let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is at your location. Drop your city, your country, your time zone. We read every single comment, and we are genuinely moved every time we see how far these stories travel. From London to Manila to Minneapolis, these stories reach people because the wounds they describe are human wounds. And that is both the most devastating and the most unifying thing about them. Now, let me tell you how a frame is built. Because Kestrel didn't walk into Thorne and Vane with a complete plan drawn up on day one. What she had was a destination. And she spent 3 years drawing the map. The betrayal didn't start with a bang. It started with a whisper. A missing file. A series of small accidents that were individually explainable and collectively catastrophic. She was counting on that. The most effective way to destroy a person's credibility is not to attack them directly. It is to make them look unreliable, careless, unstable. To create a pattern of small failures that, examined together, paint a portrait of someone you simply cannot trust. And she did it so slowly, so carefully, that I was helping her paint that portrait without knowing I was holding the brush. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. A major client, a real estate investment group called the Sterling Group, whose projects represented a significant portion of the firm's revenue, sent an urgent message to Silas's office claiming they had not received the updated structural safety reports for an ongoing project. Reports that were legally time-sensitive. Reports that, if undelivered, represented both a contractual breach and a potential regulatory issue. I was floored. I had printed those reports, organized them, and hand-delivered the physical copies to Kestrel's desk exactly 48 hours prior, along with the digital files on a clearly labeled drive and a handwritten note specifying the deadline and the recipient. I went to her calmly. I kept my voice professional. I asked what had happened to the Sterling reports. She looked up at me. And this is the part one have replayed 10,000 times since. She looked at me with those wide, dark eyes, and her expression was not defensive. It was not guilty. It was hurt. Genuinely, convincingly, deeply hurt. Her lip trembled, just slightly, just enough, and for a single terrible second I felt like the villain of the scene I was standing in. "Oh, Thatcher," she said, her voice soft with something that sounded exactly like wounded loyalty. "I sent them out immediately. I have the tracking number right here." She turned to her keyboard. Within seconds there it was, a courier confirmation, complete with tracking number, timestamp, recipient. I stared at it. I felt the tension leave my shoulders. A wave of guilt moved through me. I apologized. I actually apologized to her. I told her I was sorry for questioning her, that the deadline stress had made me paranoid, that she was always so reliable and I should have known better. She smiled. That warm, gracious, generous smile. "Don't worry about it, Thatcher. We're all under pressure. Get some rest." I bought her lunch that afternoon. A full lunch from the good Italian place she liked. I felt that bad. I didn't discover until much later that the tracking number had belonged to a box of blank paper addressed to a defunct courier depot on the south side. She had sent something. Just not the reports. The Sterling Group never received them. The delay caused a minor contractual breach that was quietly resolved, but the seed of doubt about my department's reliability had been planted in Silas's mind. And I had watered it with my own apology. She wasn't just losing files. She was gaslighting me into believing I was losing my mind. And she did it not with cruelty but with evidence. With tracking numbers and confirmation screens and that one devastatingly well-timed lip tremble. Now I need to tell you about the Solstice Project. Because you cannot understand the full scale of what she did to me without understanding what the Solstice Project meant. It had come to me the way the best ideas do, not at a drafting table, but at 2 a.m. standing at my apartment window, looking out at the parts of Chicago that never made it into architecture firm portfolios. The south and west sides. The neighborhoods where buildings were aging and overcrowded and under-resourced, where families lived in structures that were technically standing but failing in every other meaningful sense. The Solstice Project was my answer to that. A $50 million sustainable housing complex, mixed income, energy efficient, designed around community space and natural light and the kind of urban planning that treats residents as human beings rather than units. In the language of the industry, it was a landmark project. It was the kind of work that made careers. That made names. It was my ticket to full partnership at Thorne and Vane. More than that, it was the thing I was most proud of in my professional life. 18 months of work. Hundreds of revisions. Meetings with community stakeholders in church basements and school cafeterias. It had my whole heart in it. Kestrel knew this. She sat in on every meeting, taking notes with her elegant fountain pen, that silver pen that caught the light whenever she moved, nodding with what looked like genuine investment in the project's vision. She offered to coordinate scheduling, to liaise with contractors, to manage the document flow. "You've got this, Thatcher," she would say during the brutal weeks when the project felt like it was collapsing under its own weight. She would place a hand briefly on my shoulder, that light, reassuring touch. "This is going to change things. I believe in this." That touch felt like support. In reality, it was a structural survey. She was learning the building from the inside. Locating the load-bearing walls. Identifying the precise points where, if you removed support at the right moment, the whole thing would come down in exactly the way you wanted it to. By the time I understood what she had been doing in those meetings, the damage was already done. It happened over the course of 1 week. 5 days. Monday to Friday. And I want to walk you through each one, because each day was a precisely calculated step in a sequence she had been planning for a very long time. Monday, a junior analyst flagged a financial inconsistency in the Solstice Project's reporting to Silas's office. A small discrepancy. Not alarming on its own, but enough to raise an eyebrow. Silas mentioned it to me in passing, his voice carefully neutral in the way that meant it wasn't passing at all. He was watching me. I went back to my files. Everything looked correct. I flagged it for review and moved on. I assumed it was a data entry error. It was not a data entry error. Tuesday, the Sterling Group situation resurfaced, larger now. They had raised a formal complaint and were threatening to escalate to their legal team. Silas called me into his office and asked me to explain the original delay. I explained. I described delivering the files to Kestrel. I laid out the timeline. Silas nodded slowly, made notes, said he would look into it. I walked past Kestrel's desk on the way back to my office. She was on the phone, laughing softly. She caught my eye and gave me a small, warm smile of solidarity. Her expression said everything without saying anything. "Rough meeting? I'm on your side." I almost stopped to thank her. Wednesday, things accelerated. 2 more clients reported documentation issues tied to my projects. A financial audit request came from the firm's legal counsel. I worked until 11 p.m., going through every file, every correspondence log, every timestamp I could access. What I found, or rather, what I couldn't find, made the hair stand up on my arms. Emails I knew I had sent were either missing from the server logs or showed timestamps that didn't match my recollection. Documents I had signed off on showed metadata suggesting they had been modified afterward, modifications I had never made. In 2 cases, access logs showed my workstation had been opened during hours when I was not in the building. I sat in the fluorescent silence of the empty office and felt, for the first time, genuinely afraid. Not the abstract fear of a deadline missed, but the cold, electric fear of a person who realizes that the floor they are standing on is not solid. Thursday, the catastrophe arrived in full. I came in at 7:30. I had not slept. I was carrying my own coffee for the first time in 3 years, because somewhere between Wednesday night and Thursday morning, some animal instinct had told me not to accept anything I hadn't prepared myself. I stepped off the elevator and felt immediately that something was wrong. Silas was in my office. Not waiting outside it. In it, standing behind my desk, a thing Silas Vane simply did not do. His face was the color of a bruised plum. "Explain this, Thatcher." He turned my monitor toward me. The Solstice Project files, 18 months of work, hundreds of documents, were gone. Not just deleted. Scrubbed. Every folder empty. The server versions, empty. The backups, the redundant, encrypted, triple copy backups our IT protocols required, corrupted. Every single one. The room felt like it was rotating. Kestrel was standing in the doorway. She was dressed beautifully, as always. She had a look of such profound, genuine seeming heartbreak on her face that several colleagues who witnessed what came next would later describe her as the most visibly distressed person in the room. I tried to stop the sync when I saw the error message. "Silas," she said, her voice small and trembling. "But Thatcher told me he was running a new encryption script last night. I thought he knew what he was doing." She pressed her hand briefly to her mouth. "I'm so sorry. I should have called IT immediately. I had never run an encryption script in my life." I turned and looked at her. I waited for a flicker, a crack, any fragment of the truth behind the performance. I searched her face the way you search a building's facade for a fault line. There was nothing. Not a hairline fracture. Not a tremor. She looked at me with such total, convincing pity that for one nauseating second, I actually wondered if I had done something in a stress-induced state I couldn't remember. She had constructed the lies so completely that my own mind briefly turned against me. That was her gift. She didn't just lie to others. She made you lie to yourself. Friday, I had barely settled into my chair when the office doors opened. It wasn't the police. It was Silas, flanked by the firm's legal counsel, and behind them two men in plain clothes who moved with the unhurried manner of people who have done difficult things many times and made peace with it. The entire floor went silent. Silas walked to my desk. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. Quieter than I had ever heard it. Which was somehow worse than shouting. "Thatcher Vance. We've received an anonymous tip regarding the Solstice funds. We've audited the associated accounts. You're finished." I looked toward the break room. Kestrel was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, a coffee cup held loosely in both hands. She was not smiling. After 3 years of that smile greeting me every morning, its absence was like a physical change in air temperature. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. Our eyes met. And I saw, for the first time, what had always been there behind the warmth. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Something colder than both. A stillness. A finality. The eyes of someone who has finished a very long project and set down the last tool. "I tried to tell him, Silas," she said, stepping forward, her voice once again that warm instrument of concern. "I told him the money wasn't worth his soul. But he wouldn't listen." I stood there in the wreckage of my professional life, surrounded by colleagues whose expressions ranged from shock to pity to the particular uncomfortable curiosity of people watching a disaster they're relieved is happening to someone else. The woman who had smiled at me every morning had spent every night making sure I would never see the sun again. I didn't defend myself. Not yet. I didn't have anything to defend myself with. She had been building the case for 3 years. I had arrived to the fight with nothing but my word. And she had spent 18 months making my word worthless. Silas suspended me pending a full board investigation. I was told to pack a box and leave. I was clearing my desk when Kestrel walked in. She had a latte in each hand. She set mine on my desk, one last time, at the correct temperature, in the correct cup, and she smiled at me with that full, warm, porcelain curved smile. Some ancient, stubborn part of my brain responded to that smile the way it always had. With relief. "It's going to be okay, Thatcher," she said softly. "I can feel it." I looked at her. And then, past her, at her desk. Partially hidden under a stack of manila folders was a small blue flash drive. I recognized it immediately. I had lost that drive 3 months earlier and had torn my apartment apart looking for it. It contained my personal financial records, private correspondence, preliminary sketches for a side project I hadn't told anyone about. I had reported it missing to IT. They had written it off as lost. It was sitting on Kestrel's desk. She went to the break room. I moved. I crossed to her desk, took the drive, plugged it into my laptop. My hands weren't entirely steady. I watched the progress bar with an intensity one have never given anything in my life. When the transfer was complete, I put the drive in my jacket pocket and finished packing my box. I left the building at 4:57 p.m. I got home around 7. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark. I didn't turn the lights on. The only illumination was the blue-white glow of my laptop screen. I opened the drive. The folder structure told me everything before I had read a single file. There were my documents, the financial records, the correspondence, the sketches. Exactly as I remembered them. But nested alongside them were folders I had never created. Folders labeled with the names of every senior executive at Thorne and Vane. Folders labeled with project names. Folders labeled with dates going back 30 years. I opened the journal file first. It wasn't a diary. It was a dossier. Every page was dedicated to a different executive at Thorne and Vane. Each entry was written in Kestrel's handwriting, that clean, precise architectural script I had watched fill notepads in 100 meetings. Each entry contained a detailed profile, professional history, personal vulnerabilities, key relationships, known indiscretions, and what she labeled, in a clinical shorthand that made my skin crawl, structural weakness. She had been studying all of us for 3 years. The way you study a building before a controlled demolition, locating every load-bearing point, every critical joint, every place where removing support would produce the maximum, most irreversible collapse. She knew about Silas Vane's financial history, specifically, a series of transactions from 30 years ago buried deep enough to survive every compliance review the firm had ever undergone, but not deep enough to survive Kestrel Thorne. She knew about the lead structural architect's private battle with alcohol. She knew about me. She had identified, with devastating accuracy, the precise thing that would make me not just fall, but fall in a way that would be impossible to explain. That would make me look guilty even to myself. My trust. My trust was my structural weakness. And she had designed the entire collapse around it. I set down the journal. I opened the main directory of the flash drive. There was a folder labeled Project Nemesis. I opened it. What I found rearranged the entire architecture of the story I was standing in. Scanned legal documents. 30 years old, brittle at the edges even in digital reproduction, but perfectly legible. I saw Silas Vane's signature on a hostile takeover agreement for a small family-owned firm called Thorne Architecture. I read slowly and carefully, the way you read something when every word is changing the shape of everything you thought you knew. 30 years ago, Silas had orchestrated the systematic dismantling of Thorne Architecture, a small but respected firm founded by a man named Elias Thorne. Through a combination of legal pressure and the kind of corporate brutality that was easier to accomplish before the digital age created paper trails, Silas had stripped Elias Thorne of his patents, his client list, his intellectual property, and ultimately his livelihood. 3 months after the takeover was completed, Elias Thorne jumped from the 10th floor of a half-finished building on the north side of Chicago. He left behind a daughter. Her name was Kestrel. She had been 9 years old. I sat in my dark kitchen for a long time after reading that. Not thinking exactly. Just absorbing. The way a building absorbs the shock of an earthquake, all that energy moving through the structure, finding its way into every joint and connection. Kestrel Thorne had not walked into Thorne and Vane looking for a job. She had walked in looking for an execution. She had spent years constructing the most elaborate, patient act of revenge I had ever encountered. She had studied Silas the way you study an enemy fortification. She had identified his architecture. And she had decided the most devastating way to destroy him was not to attack him directly, it was to destroy the thing he loved. The firm. His legacy. She was going to burn it down. And she was going to use me to light the match. There was more in Project Nemesis. Much more. She had been siphoning money from the Solstice Project, small amounts, carefully timed, distributed across transactions so no single one would trigger an alert, into an offshore account. The account was registered to a shell company. The shell company's digital address, its metadata, its IP access logs, all of it pointed to me. To my home network. To my devices. She had built a digital cage around me so complete I could see no way out of it. There was a folder labeled with my name. Inside were hundreds of forged emails sent from my professional account over nearly 2 years, emails I had never written. To our biggest competitors, to rival firms, to development contacts in 3 cities. They discussed the sale of trade secrets, the leaking of client lists, the deliberate sabotage of the Solstice Project's timeline. The language was close enough to my professional voice to be convincing, but just slightly off in a way I couldn't immediately articulate. Alongside the emails were photographs. Digitally constructed, but constructed with skill. Images of me, or someone who looked exactly like me, meeting with rival executives in bars I had never visited, time-stamped to evenings when I had been alone in my apartment with no alibi because I was the kind of person who spent evenings alone working. She had been building this for 2 years. Every morning she smiled at me, every latte at exactly 180, every birthday she remembered, all of it had been running simultaneously with this. The warmth and the demolition in parallel, the entire time. I closed the laptop. I picked up my phone and called Silas Vane. I told him I needed to show him something important. He was silent for a long moment, the silence of a man recalibrating, recognizing the game was more complicated than he had thought. He agreed to meet me at a cafe near the river the following morning. I was there before him. I had barely slept. I had spent the night going through the drive with the same exhaustive attention that 18 months of Solstice Project work had trained in me. I organized the evidence. Built the case. Did what I knew how to do, took a complex, chaotic system and reduced it to a structure that could be understood. Silas arrived at 8 a.m. and sat across from me. He looked at me with those hawk eyes, calculating the odds that what I was about to show him was real. I opened the laptop. He read for a long time. By the end, his face had changed in a way I had never seen. Silas Vane had always looked invulnerable, the silver hair, the absolute confidence of a man who had never seriously doubted his own judgment. What I saw in his face that morning was something else. A man confronting the arithmetic of his past. The equation he had refused to solve for 30 years, finally presented as an unavoidable answer. He said, very quietly, set it up for Monday. I arrived at the office Monday morning at 7:50 a.m. with the blue drive in my pocket and 3 years of betrayal sitting in my chest like a load I had learned to carry. The morning light was coming through the east-facing windows, long and golden. The office was filling slowly, keyboards, coffee machines, people beginning another week under the assumption that the world was the same as they had left it Friday. Kestrel arrived at 8 o'clock. She moved through the door with that familiar precision, her heels clicking the marble in that rhythm I knew better than my own heartbeat. She set my coffee on my desk and smiled. The same smile. After everything, the journal, the drive, the forged emails, the offshore account, it was exactly the same smile. The warmth, the openness, the window-opening quality of it. Except now I could see through it to the wall on the other side. I stood up. I walked toward her. Slowly, because I wanted to be certain of every word. She looked up, and I watched the calculation happen behind her eyes in real time, assessing my posture, my expression. Something shifted. A heightened alertness. A predator recognizing that something has changed in the room. I sat down across from her desk. I looked at her. Why me, Kestrel? I said. I had nothing to do with what happened to your father. For one moment, just one, something cracked. Not in her expression, but somewhere beneath it. A fracture under load. The thing that happens in a building when stress exceeds yield strength and the material changes at the molecular level, invisible but already irreversible. Then the mask came down. Not gradually. All at once, the way a demolition works, the entire facade dropping simultaneously. Her face changed into something I had never seen on it. Something jagged, hard, and ferociously cold. Stripped of every performance, every constructed warmth, every grace note of the past 3 years. You're the pillar, Thatcher, she said. Her voice was different now, flat, precise, completely without sentiment. If the pillar falls, the roof comes down. Silas loves you like a son. Destroying you is the only way to truly destroy him. She leaned forward slightly. In a collapse, everyone gets crushed. That's the nature of gravity. You taught me that. You were always too curious for your own good, she continued. Too good. Too honest. It made it so much more satisfying to watch you crumble. I held her gaze. Silas did what he did to your father, I said. Not me. I built this project to help real people, Kestrel. Families who have nothing. You're destroying them to get to him. She extended her hand. Give me the drive. No, I said. My voice, when I said it, surprised me. There was no tremor in it. It came from somewhere deeper than confidence, from the place where a structure's integrity actually lives, the place that holds even when everything else has failed. Because you forgot one thing about architects, Kestrel. We don't just build things. We know how to find the one structural flaw that brings the whole thing down. And I just found yours. She went very still. The morning light caught the silver pen in her hand, the pen she had used to take notes in every meeting, to forge my correspondence, to write every entry in that journal of destruction. And the smile didn't just fade. It shattered. What came next was not graceful. She lunged for the laptop, her composure coming apart in a single violent second, a sound escaping her that was completely wrong for the professional environment she had spent years cultivating. We struggled. Blueprints scattered across the floor like fallen things. Coffee cups toppled. She reached for the drive in my hand. I've already uploaded everything to the cloud, I said. The link went to Silas and the FBI 45 minutes ago. She froze. On that drive, buried in a hidden partition she had apparently kept as a private trophy of her own cleverness, was a voice memo. Not of me. Of her. Recorded in what must have been a private moment, rehearsing the steps of the file deletion out loud, actually laughing at the ease with which she had handled, poor, trusting Thatcher. She had kept it. Not out of carelessness. Out of pride. The kind of pride that becomes, in the end, the flaw you cannot see from the outside. Her pride was the load-bearing wall I had found. The lights in the hallway came on. Silas Vane walked out of the shadows of the corridor, flanked by 2 officers from the Financial Crimes Division. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in a weekend. He was not smiling. Neither was anyone else. He had been listening through the office intercom the entire time. I had activated it the moment I walked toward her desk. Kestrel Thorne was led out of Thorne and Vane in handcuffs. Her silk blouse was torn from our struggle. Her hair had come undone from its perfect arrangement. She looked, for the first time, exactly like what she was, not the office sweetheart, not the heartbeat of the 42nd floor, not the woman who remembered everyone's birthdays and made everyone feel known and safe. She looked like a person who had spent 3 years building a bomb and had not accounted for the possibility that someone would open the fuse box. As they walked her toward the elevator, she looked at me one last time. The hatred in her eyes was the most honest thing she had ever shown me. I have never forgotten it. The investigation took 4 months. Kestrel was charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a series of related financial crimes that the federal prosecutors described as one of the most carefully constructed financial schemes they had examined in terms of patience and architecture. Not for the amounts involved, but for the years of incremental, deliberate construction. She had played a long game. And she had nearly won it. I was fully cleared. Every forged email identified. Every manipulated document traced back. Every false digital footprint followed to its true origin. One of the investigators, a quiet woman from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, told me at the end of our final interview that in 20 years she had never seen a frame this complete. If you hadn't found that drive, she said, I don't know that we would have found our way to her. I nodded. I didn't say anything. I was thinking about the hazelnut latte. About 8:05 a.m. every morning, for 3 years. About the fact that the same precision that had made her scheme so nearly perfect was the same quality that had made her genuinely good at every small, warm, human thing she had done for everyone on that floor. The birthdays. The dog names. The mother in the nursing home in Evanston. That care had been real, I think. Or close enough to real that I am not sure the distinction ultimately matters. The cruelty and the warmth had come from the same source, the same extraordinary attentiveness, the same capacity for seeing people clearly. She had used both to destroy me, and I had experienced both as gifts for 3 years. I don't know what to do with that. I have thought about it long enough to know that I simply don't know. Silas Vane survived the scandal but only barely, and not in any way that mattered. Kestrel's investigation pulled threads that led back, inevitably, to the Thorne architecture takeover 30 years prior. Those threads were old and partially frayed, but they were real, and once found could not be unfound. Silas retained his legal counsel, made certain settlements, and retired from Thorne and Vane within 6 weeks of her arrest. He was not imprisoned. The statute of limitations on the original sins was too old. But his name was removed from the firm. The skyline he had spent a career inscribing himself into went on without his signature. The Solstice Project survived. The families in the church basements and school cafeterias who had spent 2 years talking with me about what it meant to build something for them, they got their building. It was completed by a different team. I was credited as the originating architect. Someone who attended the ribbon cutting told me it looked beautiful. I was not there to see it. I had already left Chicago. I live in a small town now. Far enough from Chicago that the wind feels different here, less aggressive, more resigned. The tallest structure in town is the grain elevator on the south edge, and even that is only 4 stories. I still draw every morning. Not buildings, mostly. Landscapes. The specific way winter light falls across flat land when the trees have no leaves and you can see the actual structure of things, the branches, the lines, the bare geometry underneath. I find that beautiful now in a way I wasn't capable of finding anything beautiful for a long time after Chicago. There is a cafe in town. Small, warm, locally owned. The barista's name is Ruth, and she is perhaps 60, with the efficient warmth of a person who has been providing comfort in the form of hot beverages for a long time and has made peace with that being a sufficient contribution to the world. Every morning, Ruth smiles at me and asks how I'm doing. I am honest with you when I say that for the first year I lived here, I could not receive that smile without my whole nervous system initiating a response I am not proud of. A tightening. A rapid, involuntary assessment. What is behind this? What is being built while I'm not looking? I am better now. Mostly. I take the coffee. I say good morning. Sometimes I even smile back. But I check the lid. Always. Every single time, without fail, I check the lid. It has never once been improperly sealed. But I check it anyway. Some recalibrations are permanent. I started a small firm. Just me, and eventually a young architect I hired whose work reminded me of my own early drawings, ambitious, a little uncertain, full of genuine love for the thing being built. I do my own filings now. I make my own coffee. I answer my own phone. I have rebuilt my professional life on the architectural principle of load distribution, no single point of dependency, no single person with access to everything. I know that sounds cold. Some days it costs more than I can easily say. But I am still standing. And in architecture, that is not a small thing. I want to leave you with something that has stayed with me through all of it. The world is full of extraordinary structures. Walk through any major city and look up. Look at what human beings have managed to construct out of steel and glass and mathematics and imagination. The bridges, the towers, the arching spans of things that should not be able to hold their own weight and yet do. It is genuinely miraculous. But here is what every architect knows that the people who live inside the buildings don't always think about: the most beautiful structures often hide the most complex interior. The smooth, seamless curtain wall of glass conceals an inner skeleton of steel and tension and calculated redundancy that is, in truth, the entire reason the building stands. The beauty is real. But so is everything hidden behind it. People are the same. I thought I was good at reading structures. I thought years of finding invisible fractures gave me a particular skill for understanding what things were made of underneath. I was wrong. Or rather, I was right about buildings and catastrophically wrong about the person who handed me my coffee every morning. The most dangerous thing in my story was not the fraud. It was not the forged emails or the offshore account or the corrupted backups. The most dangerous thing was warmth. Specifically, the use of warmth as a delivery mechanism for something that wanted to kill you. The way that genuine, consistent, attentive care, real care, or something indistinguishable from real, can be made into a weapon by someone who understands you well enough to know exactly where you are softest. I don't know how to arm yourself against that. I have thought about it for years. You cannot stop trusting people entirely, that is not a life, that is a bunker. But you can stay curious. You can learn to hold trust and observation in the same hand, to receive warmth gratefully while also, quietly, paying attention to what is happening in the room. You can remember that architects and demolitionists often know exactly the same things. The only difference is what they choose to build. And you can check the lid on your coffee. Every single morning. Just to be sure. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it made you think about trust, about the people you share your days with, about the invisible structures of your own life, then it has done what it was meant to do. Betrayal is one of the oldest wounds in the human story. We keep telling these stories because we keep needing them. What would you have done in Thatcher's position? Would you have noticed earlier? Is there a sign you think he missed that you would have caught? Tell us in the comments, we read every single one. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support is what keeps this community alive. We will see you in the next story. Until then, stay curious. Stay watchful. And build carefully.